Ever get that feeling like you're being watched, even when you're totally alone? Ever think that with all the cameras, satellites, and sensors in the modern world, maybe there are much older and much more attentive eyes on you? I've had that feeling, and it wasn't because of some security camera on the corner. It was while reading this super old text, like over 2,000 years old, where this exiled dude who didn't have any tech or modern stuff saw wheels with eyes, heavenly beings with a bunch of faces, a throne that moved like a spinning top, and the overwhelming presence of something or someone who sees everything. That's the vision of the prophet Ezekiel. And honestly, I've never looked at the sky the same way since I learned about it. What blows my mind is that back then, he had absolutely no tech references. Even so, he managed to describe something that sounds like it's straight out of a sci-fi movie. These wheels within wheels, covered in eyes, that moved with the cherubim and carried God's throne. There's no way to read that without picturing some super intelligent being trying to show itself in the most visual way possible. But then comes the part that really got me. The eyes. Hundreds of them, in every direction. Like the very structure holding up the divine was made of consciousness. That doesn't just sound like heavenly surveillance. It sounds like the idea of a God who doesn't just watch, but understands, who sees beyond the surface. And then I started making connections. In our world, we've got algorithms that track what we watch, what we click on, where we are. Cameras in the subways, drones flying over cities, sensors that monitor our heartbeats. Technology, in a way, has created its own Ophanim, wheels with eyes that spin around us, recording everything. But there's a huge difference between these two kinds of watching. The first one is impersonal, cold, often used for control. The second, it's intimate. It's divine. Ezekiel saw eyes that don't just observe, but carry the Spirit of God. And those eyes weren't there to judge or punish. They were there to guide, to protect, to remind the exiled guy that he wasn't alone. Have you ever stopped to think about that? That maybe the world is getting its priorities backward, trying to copy God's gaze with machines, while forgetting the real presence of the one who sees everything, but also loves everything? I wonder if people today would look at the Ophanim with the same awe as Ezekiel, or if they just see a cosmic gear, a surveillance system in the sky. But the truth is, they're not just visual symbols. They're spiritual reminders. There's a purpose behind divine watching. There's care. There's direction. In times when many feel invaded, exposed, and insecure about their privacy, it's almost comforting to imagine that there's a different kind of gaze. A gaze that sees our flaws, yeah, but also our struggles. That sees when no one else does. That's there, even when no one else is around. Ezekiel didn't just see angels. He saw a living architecture of God's presence, a moving throne, a glory that moved across the land, and all of it with eyes. Countless eyes. Maybe the biggest question this vision leaves us with today is, how are we living, knowing that we're being watched by something that knows even our deepest thoughts? Technology can watch our bodies, but only God can reach our soul. Have you ever felt exiled, even when surrounded by people? Ever gone through that kind of loneliness that has nothing to do with being physically alone, but with being disconnected inside, like you don't belong anywhere anymore? We live in the most connected era in human history. We've got social media, the internet, video calls, artificial intelligence. We can talk to someone on the other side of the world in seconds. And yet, we've never felt so lost. That's why Ezekiel's story hit me so hard. He was an exile man, literally. He was far from his land, his culture, his temple, his routine, displaced. But it was in that very place, in the middle of chaos, confusion, and pain, that he had one of the most extraordinary visions in the Bible. God revealed himself to him not in Jerusalem, but in Babylon, in a foreign land, in the middle of trauma. It makes me wonder, aren't we all, in some way, in Babylon today? I'm not talking about a physical location. I'm talking about the feeling of being far from what's familiar, far from a time when things seemed to make more sense, far from the faith that was once strong, far from yourself. Modern exile comes in many forms. It could be the anxiety that keeps you from peace. It could be an identity crisis when you ask yourself who you really are. It could be a spiritual disconnect, when everything feels empty, even prayer. And that's where the beauty of Ezekiel's vision comes in. God shows up where no one expects. He appears not when everything is okay, but when everything is messed up. God's throne isn't stuck in some holy place. It comes to us. It moves. It crosses borders and ruins. It reaches the exiled. That's the promise. And it's still alive. Recent data shows that global mental health is declining, especially among young people. Loneliness, depression, crises of faith, all of this is more present than ever. But maybe the problem isn't God's absence. Maybe it's the excess noise. Modern Babylon is loud, full of distractions, and tries to convince us that we're alone. But we're not. Just like Ezekiel, maybe we're exactly at the point where God wants to show us something we wouldn't see in any other situation. Maybe it's in the pain of exile that he reveals to us that his presence doesn't depend on temples or perfection or good times. The glory Ezekiel saw wasn't a small comfort. It was something that redefined his mission, that gave purpose to his pain. He didn't just survive exile, he became a messenger, a channel of divine presence for others who also felt lost. And that's where everything changes. Maybe you're feeling out of place today. Maybe it seems like no one understands what you're going through. But there's a moving throne. There's a presence that goes wherever you are. You don't need to go back to find God. He's already coming your way. I've realized that often exile is the most fertile ground for a fresh start. It was there, in the middle of a captive people, that a new vision was born. It was in the desert of the soul that Ezekiel heard God's voice. And it might be there, exactly where you are right now, that he's going to speak to you too. Humans have always looked for something beyond what the eyes can see. Since the earliest civilizations, we've looked at the sky, searched for patterns in the stars, listened to stories of beings that inhabit other realms. We want meaning. We want explanations. And above all, we want to know if we're alone. Maybe that's why visions like Ezekiel's still fascinate us so much today. It's not just a spiritual description. It's almost a portal to another level of reality. The idea of celestial beings with multiple faces, wings, and eyes all over their bodies might sound absurd to some, but it awakens something deep in others. Because deep down, we're all searching for something. Nowadays, the search for meaning hasn't decreased. It's just changed its form. Spirituality has left the temples and invaded podcasts, YouTube videos, TikTok profiles. Interest in astrology, meditation, supernatural phenomena, higher intelligences, and even theories about interdimensional beings is growing. We're hungry for answers that logic doesn't always offer. And that's where the angels come back into the picture. The Ophanim, for example, with their wheels and eyes, confront us with an ancient mystery that's still relevant today. They're not just symbolic figures. They're expressions of the incomprehensible, of the eternal, of what's beyond words and physics. What Ezekiel saw could very well be what so many today seek in modern rituals, spiritual retreats, or even psychedelic experiences. A break from the ordinary, a glimpse of the divine. But there's a crucial difference here. Ezekiel wasn't looking for an experience for its own sake. He didn't want to just feel something. He was visited. He was chosen to see. And what he saw didn't just fascinate him. It completely transformed him. This is where I stop to reflect. Does what we're searching for today really transform us? Or does it just distract us? Ezekiel's vision wasn't just visual. It was a call. It was like heaven saying, "You're not seeing everything. There's more, so much more." And that invitation still echoes today. It still reaches us. It still whispers, "Stop running in circles. I am the center." The desire for connection with something bigger is legitimate. It's imprinted on the human soul. But the difference between searching and revelation is in the focus. While many try to manipulate the invisible, Ezekiel made himself available to the invisible to be shaped. I believe that's what's missing today. We live in a generation with access to all kinds of knowledge, and yet we feel empty. Because knowledge without wisdom, vision without purpose, is just noise. Ezekiel's angels weren't there to impress. They were there to show that there's order in chaos. meaning an apparent confusion, and a God at the center of everything. Maybe what the world needs most right now isn't more data, but more visions, more revelations that come from within, that are born in silence, in surrender, in a sincere search for something bigger than ourselves. What Ezekiel saw isn't just a biblical curiosity. It's a reminder that the meaning of life isn't in finding an explanation for everything, but in surrendering to what has already found us. Have you ever tried to describe a dream to someone and realized that no matter how many words you used, it didn't even come close to what you felt? Now imagine having to describe a vision that came directly from heaven, a divine revelation, something that defies all categories of human language. That's what Ezekiel faced. When reading the first chapter of the book of Ezekiel, what strikes me most isn't just the content of the vision, but the prophet's desperate effort to put the impossible into words. Something like it looked like an appearance similar to. He uses metaphors, analogies, images borrowed from Earth to try and convey something that's totally from another dimension. It made me think, maybe the Bible doesn't always want us to understand everything with mathematical clarity. Maybe the invitation is different, a call to contemplate, to imagine, to open ourselves to the mystery. Ezekiel, at that moment, became more than a prophet. He became an artist of the spiritual experience, a poet of the indescribable, a translator of visions. We live in an age where everything needs to be explained, documented, proven. And yet, how many times do we feel that words aren't enough? When we see someone suffering deeply, or when we experience something so beautiful that it's impossible to put into sentences, all that's left is silence, or an image. That's why I believe that God also communicates through images. He's always done that, with Joseph and his dreams, with John and Revelation, with Isaiah and his visions, and with Ezekiel, whose mind was literally invaded by a living painting of heaven. What does this teach us today? That we need to relearn how to see, to listen with our eyes, to let symbols lead us to something beyond the literal. The cherubim, the Ophanim, the wheels with eyes, the flaming throne, all of this forms a language that's beyond rational discourse. A language that speaks directly to the spirit. A language that can only be understood from the inside out. When I read Ezekiel, I feel like I'm standing before a living screen. A prophetic cinema, a universe that pulsates with hidden meanings. And maybe that's the intention, for each reader to be confronted not with answers, but with questions bigger than themselves. How do you describe a being with 4 faces and wings that move without turning its body? How do you express in ancient Hebrew the vision of wheels within wheels, full of eyes and moved by an invisible spirit? The answer is, you don't describe it. You try, and in trying, you give us something more valuable than a technical report, a bridge between 2 worlds. Ezekiel invites us to stop trying to explain everything and simply contemplate, admire, and let ourselves be touched by a language that burns from within. Many visual artists have tried to represent his vision over the centuries. But maybe the greatest representation is yet to come. Maybe it's in the heart of whoever reads or whoever watches, whoever feels. Because in the end, God doesn't just want to be understood. He wants to be experienced. And for that, sometimes words aren't enough. There are days when we just break down. The world seems to crumble around us, and all we can think is, where is God in the middle of all this? The truth is, that question has echoed since ancient times. And maybe it's never been as relevant as it is now. We live surrounded by wars, tragedies, economic crises, natural disasters, and a general feeling that chaos is winning. But it's precisely in these scenarios that Ezekiel's vision becomes even more powerful, because it reminds us of a truth that doesn't depend on circumstances. God is still on the throne, and he moves. Ezekiel's throne isn't fixed. It comes to the exile. It shows up in the middle of suffering. It appears with fire, light, wheels full of eyes, and celestial beings, all to make one thing clear: we are not alone. When we understand that, everything changes, because knowing that there's a divine presence that accompanies our every step, even in the midst of pain, gives us the strength to keep going. God's glory isn't limited to temples or good days. It appears on battlefields, in hospitals, in dark rooms of despair. And sometimes in the simplest things, an unexpected hug, a silent prayer, an inexplicable breath of peace. God's presence is real. And if the Ophanim represent anything, it's this: movement and constant presence. They don't stay still. They spin. They go. They follow the Spirit. Wherever there's a need, they are there. And along with them, the certainty that God continues to see and continues to act. In times of chaos, it's common for faith to waver. But it's also in these times that it can become stronger in a deeper way. The faith that survives chaos isn't blind, it's conscious. It knows that answers won't always come quickly, but it chooses to trust anyway. Ezekiel fell face down when he saw God's glory, not out of fear, but out of reverence, because he understood, even far from home, even in enemy territory, even without hope, God was still there, still shining, still speaking. And that's what I want you to take away with you today. Maybe you're facing a battle that no one sees. Maybe you're exiled within your own heart. But know this, there's a moving throne, a God who reveals himself even in the midst of confusion, who draws near even when everything seems lost. You don't need to understand everything, or see wheels of fire or creatures with wings. Just know that he is with you. And if he is with you, then nothing is truly out of control. The divine presence is what sustains the universe and also your inner world, even when it seems like everything is going to fall apart. At the end of the book of Ezekiel, God says, the name of the city from that time on will be, "The Lord is there." May that also be the invisible inscription on your life. Wherever you are, in any situation, the Lord is there,